Hey,
Hey, how you doing?
how are you, man?
I'm all right. Fighting the good fight here.
Yeah.
Yeah,
How's the summer been treating you?
busy, very busy.
Yeah.
So
Have
I
you
think I'm
been?
home one Saturday from like June 15th to August 16th.
Wow. Is that
Yeah,
like hockey, admissions, family, all of it?
all of the above.
Yeah.
Craig's actually taken over our girls program, which is really exciting for him. I think,
Yeah,
and then
that's great.
just kind of doubles my load a little bit. Got to go to some things that he was going to do, and so we've got that and school, family, just everything.
Yeah. Yep. I just got back from, I was in Sweden for 10 days.
Oh,
So
geez. How was that?
it was great. My son was playing in a soccer tournament and I'd never been to Gothenburg. So,
Yeah.
yeah, it was cool. It was a cool experience.
It's a cool part of the world. I've been to Finland once, not Sweden, but Finland.
Yeah, and it's like one of those massive. It was, I mean, it's great. The tournament's huge. Like they did the opening ceremonies in a 30,000 seat soccer stadium for the event and like packed it out. It's crazy. Um, so yeah. All right, so we'll just jump into it. We're just going to talk.
Oh,
We'll talk about admissions hockey, Hotchkiss, or um, I was thinking though before we jumped on. I think the last time I probably like interviewed you was when you were like a ninth grader um, at Cardigan Mountain, and
yeah,
then, made the poor decision to go to Choate instead of coming to Berkshire.
correct.
Um, but like, well, I guess one of the things that I want to talk to you a little bit about is what was that decision like for you as a kid and to like go to junior? How did you end up going to Cardigan? Like, what was that? How did that happen for you?
Yeah. Truthfully, I don't come from a boarding school background.
Right.
My dad was actually first one to go to college in his family. And so both my parents went to public school. We moved to a town that had a good public school system, and that was kind of my plan all
Yeah.
along. And then I did the pre-prep showcase, which was a good event. And actually, backstep, I actually did a camp at Cardigan with my youth team. We went up and I saw it, and I came home. I must have been in sixth or seventh grade, and told my mom like I'm going here. This was awesome, and she was like, "Absolutely not. You're not going away.
Yeah.
Someone else is raising my kid. Like
Right.
forget it."
Yep.
Then a year goes by. I was at the pre-prep showcase, and I was actually approached by another junior boarding school. It was Eagle Brook that saw me and
Yeah.
was like, "Be curious to get you on campus." And so we did. We went, and I said, if I'm going to see Eagle Brook, like we
Go
should
look at
see.
them all.
I just looked at those two, and
Yep.
my heart was like solely set on Cardigan pretty much since I was 13.
Yeah, and it is. It's such I think a unique path in some ways, right? Like obviously for you and I working in boarding schools, like we see it more often, but for so many people I know like that, like as I was the same way. Like my parents were from the Bronx in New York. So like when I was like, I want to go to boarding school, they were like, this is crazy. But I think that's even sort of yeah, on another level when you're talking about that decision even to go to junior boarding school. But I was talking to obviously I mentioned that just because so I had the same conversation with Tim Jonkis. Like Tim and I have known each other since we were really young. Like I feel like I've known you in that capacity, but like um that so many of the coaches I've talked to and even myself, right? Like that experience that we had in boarding schools like so foundational and transformative for us that like that's what we've chosen to come
Yep.
back to, right? Like, and so for you it was Cardigan and then Choate, right? Was 3 years you were at Choate?
Yep. 10, 11, 12.
Yep. Um, college and then right back, right? Like pretty quickly for you, you got back into boarding school.
It was ironically Berkshire was my first
Right.
stop. Um,
Yep.
But I did do 10 months in New York. I got a little bit of cold feet.
Same as me.
I was like, my friends are all moving to Boston and New York. I was deciding on whether I wanted to keep playing. Like, did I
Yep.
want to go to Europe and play in some of those lower leagues and just see the world a little bit?
Yep.
Uh, but chase the money in the city and
Yep.
that. Hated it.
Yep.
Really hated it. It got old quickly. And then got back into coaching and found a job at Berkshire and was fortunate enough to kind of get my foot in the door
Yep.
there.
Yeah, I
Um,
did the same thing. I might have lasted a year, like not in school. Like it might have been,
mhm.
well, no, I mean, whatever it was. Like I got out of college. I probably started a job in September, and then the following September I was in school. So like I was in the same boat. And then it was Berkshire for what, two, how many years were you at
I did
Berkshire?
I did two at Berkshire.
And then,
I did Brewster Academy for 4, and now I've been at Hotchkiss. I'm going in a year 4 here at Hotchkiss.
so, and again, like, I know this sounds like you're not that young. You're young to me, but so
Yeah.
that, but so this will be your eighth. Is this like year 8 as a head coach then?
This will be year 8 as a head coach. Yep.
Yep. And I think, one of the things that's great is like, you know, all these different experiences. I talked to Tim Jonkis, who's like been at Westminster for 21, 22 years, right? And went there. Same with like Chris Bala, who I spoke to,
Yeah.
who's a Hill alum and been there for 22 years. But I think it's really interesting that you've had or having now this experience at 3 different schools, all great places, but all like really different from each other. So talk a little bit about like what that's been like, because like um, I love all 3 of those schools, but like they're Berkshire, Brewster, and Hotchkiss are all really different places.
Totally. And I think, going to Brewster was an awesome experience. And part of that decision to leave Berkshire was more just where I was in life in terms
Mm-hmm.
of, wanted to get into admissions, had a head coaching opportunity, was moving actually closer to home, an hour from my parents. So it was more of a life decision because I loved my time at Berkshire, truthfully, too, and obviously
Yep.
still talk to people there. Um, I think I've really learned at all 3 places. We talk so much about fit, you
Right.
know, and trying to find that right fit. But it is true, like being at those 3 places, I've seen how education can be impactful for different types of kids.
Yep.
And I think that's really powerful. And I think they all do things differently, but they all do things really great at the same time.
Yeah.
Uh, and coaching different types of kids has been quite an experience as well. And like learning on, some kids you can tell to do something and they pick it up, others need different, so it really pushed me to be a better educator and a better coach too by being in all 3 of those different places and being able to try different things that maybe if I was just at Hotchkiss for 8 years I wouldn't.
Right.
So I think that made me kind of a better coach, a better teacher,
Yep.
um, being at those different places too. So but just really changed my perspective on like just education as a whole and like what education can do. Like all of those experiences are going to be transformative for kids, as you mentioned, but just trying to find, you know, what is it that families and students are really looking for, and how can schools support them appropriately?
So you were in doing admissions when you got to Brewster, right? So were you doing admissions there?
So I taught math at Berkshire, and then I transitioned to admission at Brewster. So that was my first admission
And
experience.
now obviously are doing admissions and financial aid, playing a role in financial aid there at Hotchkiss. So yeah, one of the things, and I think you have a unique perspective on this too, is when I talk to families all the time, like one of the things you've probably heard me say this to families, right? Of like trying to explain to them, like, this is not like college hockey, right? Like this is not coach goes into a rink, likes you, hey, I want you on I'd love to have you come on my team. You meet sort of these minimum academic requirements of like, the NCAA clearinghouse, and like you're going to get a roster spot, right? Like the process for us in boarding schools is so different. And like, Hotchkiss, I think obviously is is a really different place in terms of how you guys manage that admission process. So like how how is that for you? Yeah, like how do you balance that, like those kind of dual roles, right? Like, because as an admissions, you know, an associate director of admission, and I know from my involvement with like you're heavily involved in managing the applicant pool as a whole, and how, yeah, just talk a little bit about how that works for like you separating the hockey piece out of that and like the recognition, like you're making, I only know this from my experience because you and I have talked about kids where you've been like, hey, I love the kid as a hockey player. Like, I'd love to get him and I'd love to have him, but like, we're going to have a really difficult time, even with me being in the admission office, of like getting him admitted.
Right. Yeah, I mean, you really have to understand the applicant pool as a whole. And that took me kind of a year or two. I'm going to year four
Right.
now, so I think I have a good handle on it. So, in terms of just separating it, as it relates to my role in hockey, like just understanding, and being able to compartmentalize. And sometimes that can be hard because you're sort of motivated by your own interests,
Right.
sometimes
Yeah.
self-consciously, right? Or subconsciously. And so just trying to be, you know, cognizant of that bias in the process. And, I actually don't even interview any boy hockey players,
Yep.
and so that's like one way we do it. Another is to recognize, like, yeah, we want volume in the traffic, and then helping those families have a good experience through this process, and then figuring out who's going to be a fit for our program, right? And sometimes they obviously have to go together, but sometimes there are kids where, hey, this is a really great fit, but they might not completely check the hockey boxes, or vice versa, like you said, and sometimes fall in the middle. So it's really about trying to find the right candidate for the school first, and then assessing where they fall based on our applicant pool hockey wise, and how they might be able to help our program, but what their experience might be like at Hotchkiss.
Yeah. I think one of the things I've always really kind of, I don't have a better word, I guess, like admired, I think, about what Hotchkiss does really well is, and I've had this conversation with some of my families. I think the school has a very well earned academic reputation, um, which honestly sometimes for what I do with families can almost be intimidating,
Yeah.
right? Like the idea of like, well, I mean, he or she, like she's not going to be able to get into Hotchkiss, right? And I think I'm really thoughtful about, and I have, like I said, in our, my conversations with you or with, with Irby Mitchell, talking about like, I do think you as a school are, obviously you're trying to ensure that kids are going to be capable of finding academic success at Hotchkiss, right? Like that's got to happen. But are really thoughtful in understanding that, like, yeah, how you're determining which of those kids can do that. There is no one formula for that, right? Like their kids are going to be able to demonstrate that to you guys in different ways. And I've always kind of admired that there's not the like, okay, like, you know, got to have this GPA and this test score or we can't admit them. Like those are not the conversations you and I have with about kids. And so, yeah,
No, I think that's true. I mean, I think families should know that, and I would hope this is true for any school, but no school is going to admit a student that they don't think they can serve,
right.
right? And so, in my opinion, there's no harm in going through a process and trying to figure out, okay, do they feel like they can serve you, and is it a mutual fit, right? I think I don't want families to be intimidated at the same time, because truthfully, like, if you do your research and homework, like, there is support, at a place like ours where it's 600 kids, like, there is a teaching and learning center. We do have peer-to-peer tutoring, right? So there are supports in place for students that might need just a little bit of a softer landing upon entry, right? But
Yep.
we're not. And then the other piece, and you mentioned it because testing comes up pretty frequently, we require it. We're very committed to holistic review. And that's just one piece of the puzzle. That question probably I get, if I do 10 interviews, I'm getting it 8 times. Is what score do I need to be considered at Hotchkiss? And I just said a score,
Yeah.
like need a score um, to be considered because there are so many factors that go into a decision, to be admitted to a place like Hotchkiss.
Yeah, and I've seen that just in the last couple of years with the kids like I've worked with. And you had like I've had a range of kids who, some of whom I guess on paper you might look at and feel like, wow, that kid is, significantly stronger. Like, just the pure paper part when you're talking about holistic, like, well, this one fits all these dynamics, and some of the other ones, maybe on paper, right? Like, don't look the same. And I think you guys have done a really thoughtful job about like, hey, even though this kid is these are the reasons why we're less sure of him being successful here. And even though this young man or this young girl's like test scores may not be as high, like we're more confident she's going to be able to find success here. And I think about like, the kids I have who've been admitted there, and even the students I have enrolled there. It's, there is no that their profiles. I think they're all great kids and they're all obviously really good students, but their admissions profiles haven't. I don't know that they've looked similar, right? Like they're pretty different.
That's what makes it challenging.
Right.
Is here we see that, and they are different, and that's where the conversations come in about ultimately who to admit, is because usually you're talking about two kids that are completely different and have nothing in common.
Yeah. Yep. The other thing too that I think is really interesting, now from a hockey perspective, and you guys are a great example of this. I talked to Sean O'Brien last week about this. It started coming up of like one of the things I've seen I think is starting to change a little bit now, and like we're starting to see is like they're increasingly being maybe some really good opportunities, not just from an admission standpoint. Like I'm always a believer that from an admission standpoint, and we can talk about this, like particularly at a place like Hotchkiss, like you guys are always going to admit way more ninth graders than you are 11th graders, right?
Totally.
But the challenge from the hockey standpoint has always been like, well, there's, I can't, that old sort of myth, I guess, of like, I can't play varsity hockey till I'm an 11th grader. But like, I had a ninth grader, I worked with a ninth grader who was on your varsity team last year. And so, yeah, talk a little bit about, because I think that's really different from when I was trying to recruit you, right? In
Yeah.
whatever year that was, 2008. But I think it's probably also different from when I left coaching, which is right around the time you started coaching. Like, I, maybe I'm wrong, but it feels like to me that has started to change.
Yeah, I think it's definitely changed. And I think the landscape of hockey is changing quicker
For
than
sure.
the market is responding for sure. So that I'm curious to see. And I think, even being out this summer, based on the interactions and conversations with families, I've certainly seen some changes. In terms of like younger kids, I've had a ninth grader on my roster all 3 years I've been at Hotchkiss.
Yep.
And actually, like thinking back on the top of my head, I believe I've had a ninth grader on my roster for the first 7 years as a head coach.
Yep.
Uh, you know, I this coming year may be the first year, and we've got a couple kids in the mix, so it
Yeah.
could hold true, but this might be the first year we don't have a ninth grader on our roster.
Right.
And some of that is spatial. It's we didn't have as many spots as we've had in the past, but
Well, and also you had younger guys, right? So like there's going
yeah,
to be much like,
we had younger guys that are just older, right? So seeing some of those ninth and 10th graders kind of grow and see that come into fruition, I think the biggest challenge for younger kids is just like the physical maturity piece.
right.
It's usually not a skill piece. It's usually not, the brains, like it's usually just physical maturity. I think one of the ways that prep's evolving too, you're starting to see think some families like really questioning the repeat piece,
Yep.
which is a challenge. And so I think prep coaches you're trying to develop players first and foremost, but then there is that subtle background of like we want to win too. And so what is that balance and what does that recipe look like? The ninth graders I've had that have all played a lot of minutes have been 6'2", usually higher end kids that have reclassified.
Yep.
Um, I haven't had a true freshman on my
Right.
roster because it's hard to compete with any 19-year-old,
Right.
So I think having younger kids just about what their expectation is going into it is a good thing. Like I'm not saying like a ninth grader can't be on my roster. Like it's just, hey, I'm gonna have a spot for you, and the goal is to develop and to not worry about how many minutes you're playing, and you'll get in if you get in, and this is our path forward here, right? And this is the goal, and hopefully each step of the way you're moving up, right?
Yep.
Um, those
No, and I mention it specifically, like I said, I brought it up with you and with Sean because part of what uh, I've seen sometimes is, yeah, like for me, it's always that, and obviously in some ways the reverse of what we started this conversation with, I'm doing too, right? Of balancing the admissions and the hockey piece with the families I'm working with, right? And I do sometimes get these families who are like, hey, you know, my son or my daughter, like really high achieving kid wants to be at a place where they're going to be challenged academically, feels like a profile that would be admissible at a place like Hotchkiss, potentially have the ability to impact a varsity hockey team, right? Um, and then they're coming to me and that conversation around like, well, we want to wait. We want to wait till they're 11th grade, and balancing the idea of like, okay, but you need to understand that like, I don't know, you could probably give me the numbers off the top of your head, but like, I know we talked about it, like you guys, how many freshman boys are you admitting versus like how many 11th grade boys are
a
you
lot
admitting,
more.
right? Like it's
I think from an admission standpoint, like again, this is sort of back to your
yeah, it's
rating
hard.
too, which is really hard. Like if you have an opportunity to get into a school that you're aspiring to attend, and you get in, you should go, regardless
Right.
of when it is. If you pass up on an opportunity, that same opportunity might not be there in 2 years for various reasons. Just selectivity, um, your development is going to be different too. Like where you are, kind of flipping it to the hockey side, we're only taking maybe 3 to 4 juniors at most
Yep.
a year. So, like, are you that confident you're going to be a top 3 or 4 recruit, right?
Right.
Like from the hockey side. So if you're good enough, you're good enough. And I believe that. I think that's partly why I'm in this is because it's holistic, and I think we have a program at Hotchkiss where you can be a part of a JV team and still get development and still have the opportunity to move up. We have a couple kids that are trying out. We have a couple kids that we've rostered that have played JV, and so if you're good enough, like you're going to get there. I think at these more selective schools, if there's an opportunity to go, you should go,
Right.
uh, because that opportunity may not come again. And truthfully, with the, kind of flipping to the hockey side, the landscape is changing so much. 99.9% of kids are playing junior hockey if they want to pursue NCAA hockey.
Yep.
And so there's no like rush in a weird way. Like it almost eases a little bit of pressure as
Yeah.
coaches from a placement standpoint. Um, but I think if you have the opportunity to go and to develop holistically as a person and as a player at a school that you aspire to go to, you should do it.
Yeah. No, I agree. And I've heard the same thing too. You mentioned before about the with all the changes that have gone on now with like, major junior and who can play college hockey in this whole wave, the uncertainty, I think the really valid questions around like reclassifying and that and who's it going to be right for and is it the thing everyone should do or not? Like I think those are things I'm certainly wrestling with more with some of the families I'm talking with. But like you, I am a believer in that idea of like, hey, if this is the right fit and there there is a really good development pathway for you there to find the success that you want in terms of athletics or hockey. Um, Even if it may not look perfect for you like on day one, from an admission standpoint, like this is our opportunity and we can't necessarily, as you said, like I know because you and I have talked about that, like, hey, you know, we had a kid. I had a kid who like turned it down, and I'm calling you next year, and they're like, hey, we're not going to be able to take him, right? Like we're now we can't take him.
Right.
And so, yeah, I think one of the other big changes from a development standpoint that's changed. I mean, is totally different from when I was recruiting you and coaching, but even really different from when you started coaching is now like that fall hockey piece. So like
Mhm.
what will that look like for you guys moving? I know it's changing year to year, but do you guys know what it's going to look like for you this upcoming fall?
Yeah, totally. I think it's it's hard because it's always sort of a
Yep.
sliding scale. I think at the core, what we offer at Hotchkiss is really, really good. Our ice is down September 16th.
Two
Um,
sheets, right? You guys have
we
you
do
put
have two
both
sheets, and
you
so
put
one
both
of them
sheets.
one of them is down in September. The
Yep.
other is still an indoor turf for like the fall teams and stuff if it rains or what have you. So September 16th, that ice is down, and our kids have a structured regiment, pretty much 6 days a week. So they're getting individual skill training, they're getting a team practice, they're getting a skating clinic, and we bring all of that in. So that's three formal skates during the week. Plus, they do our dynamic training with our strength coach, who's been at ACC schools and you name it, he's probably overqualified, which is awesome.
Yep.
And so that piece will, I foresee, remaining very consistent. We're still doing the peak performance prep league.
Yep.
There are some kids that are double rostered and whatnot, but Chris has done a great job with that because you know it's not our completely our whole team because we do have some kids that play like football and
Yep.
things of that nature, but everybody that's on our roster is rostered for it. And so it's great in terms of transportation. Being in Lakeville is a little different than being inside 495 of Boston, right?
Right.
And so it just works really well for us. And so we're going to keep doing that. And I think that's another piece of the puzzle too that's sort of tied in everything else is I think there are a lot of misconceptions about what you have to do
Yep.
in the fall. And again, like I think if you're good enough, you'll get there. I think it should be development focused, it should be school focused, and then the other stuff will take care of itself. Especially as junior and kids are committing later and all of that stuff. Like where you play in October, where you play games in October, your 10th grade year is not going to make a difference where you're going to play potentially in college in 5 years, you
Right.
know. And so I think you just want to be in an environment where you feel like you're getting better every single day and really pushing yourself. And I think we can certainly provide that.
Yeah, and I think more important. I think you know, my my feeling around the fall hockey the whole piece of it, honestly, has evolved. Right, like as an educator, as a parent, right. Like I have my son who's not a hockey player but is a soccer player. Right, like we run this same dynamic of like there's fall hockey and or fall soccer and he wants to play spring soccer. So like I'm wrestling it too versus like the good old days when I played three sports, like the reality of that is it's changed. But I think the one thing that I think the vast majority of schools are doing now, which is so much better and within the model you have, is like um, whether it is the PPP league that you guys are playing in, or some schools that are roster creating their own fall team, however you want to say it. I think the opportunity for kids who want that extra hockey development to be there exists, but also now it it doesn't come at the expense of being a part of the community in the fall on the weekends, which was like when I was coaching was my huge concern of like, well, we're bringing these, particularly for new students, like you're coming in here as a new ninth grader or 10th grader or 11th grader or whatever it may be. And like every weekend in the fall, like you're not going to be here to watch the football game or be here for the school dance. And like you're missing out on what is, I think, a huge part of the educational experience that, you know, there is, I think, a better balance to it now in terms of how you guys have structured those things.
Yeah, totally. I mean, and I think if you talk to a lot of coaches, right, they're always trying to move the needle forward and
Right.
keep developing and getting better, but and sometimes it feels like we're just kind of beating a dead horse. But I think the reality is if you looked 8 years ago when I started, like there weren't a lot of schools that were on the ice starting September 15th and unallowed to skate at 4:30 and
Right.
then work out. Like that didn't really happen. So I do think there have been some positive changes and truthfully, like it's fully development focused, like to be able to go out
Yep.
and do skills and not have to worry too much about the external pressures or whatever. So I do think there have been some changes within the prep school landscape that have changed for the better in that sense. And I think schools have been great about allowing kids to do that too. Because I mean, when I was going, I didn't touch the ice, I don't think, until November 1st.
Yeah. Well, when I first started coaching, and like now it seems, well, it's crazy to think it was over 2 decades ago, right? In '03 and '04, it was like art, like we're not getting on the ice till like the weekend before tryouts, right? And then it was like the big move of, okay, we're going to let kids skate on Sunday starting in the middle of October, right? We'll put the ice down and they can only skate on Sunday. And then I think it went way off the rails then, honestly, when it was like, well, now all of the kids are just going to do outside hockey, right? So they were
Right.
all leaving every weekend, and it was putting crazy pressure on parents and kids to figure out how they were going to do all of that. And so I think that in some ways, you know, my feeling about what I love kids to be able to play three sports and do that, like I would, is it a reality of like those are days gone by? They are. And so I think now being in a situation where like, hey, this is what families want. Honestly, the reality is like for kids who want to have the opportunity to play collegiately, like this is probably now what they need. Like there's no way around that, and doing it in a way that allows kids to really continue to be a part of the community. I think like that's, to me, I think a really good value added that like it feels like to me anyways, it's in a better place than it was when I was coaching, and probably even better than it was 8 years ago in terms of how that balance is now.
Yeah, I mean, I pretty much view it as sort of it's not a two-season model, but you're
Right.
playing hockey for 2 seasons. I mean, one season's just purely focused on development, and the other is sort of the team-oriented approach. I mean, you're doing hockey for 7 months, out of the 9 or 10 that you're here. I mean, that's a good chunk of time.
Yep. Yeah. Um, so what's your team look like for this upcoming season? Like how, you guys had a good year last year, some ups and some downs, but like return a pretty good group, right? I know from when we've talked.
Yeah, we do. We took a little bit of a step backwards from a results standpoint. My first 2 years, we really moved forward a little bit. We lost some key pieces to graduation, and so the goal for this past year, circling back to what you said, was to kind of find some younger kids that we could really kind of build around
Yep.
a future around, and so feel like we are, our 10th graders most of the time were some of our best players all the time. And again, it kind of balances what's the recipe to win and the development piece. So that was really encouraging and exciting. It got me going every day. It was like, hey, we've got some 10th graders that are really good. And we brought in some key pieces this year, all 10th and 11th graders.
Yep.
So for juniors, we have three forwards and a goaltender. And then we have three 10th grade defensemen and a 10th grade forward or two 10th grade forwards.
That's
So
so how many part of this is like for most of the families I've noticed this, like the feedback I've gotten in these initial conversations is like, um, hey, how be great. Like we're thinking about the fall of 26. How many, like, what are going to be the opportunities then? So how many guys off that group are you losing? Do you know?
yeah, so we're sort of bringing in sort of the nucleus, of the group. We're gonna lose three forwards who will play,
Yep.
and two defensemen that will
Yep.
play. But we'll graduate. will graduate 7.
Yeah.
Um, so we're probably looking for 3 to 4 forwards, 2, maybe 3 defensemen, depending on the age. Like I would
Yep.
love to have a younger defenseman, to sort of buffer that gap because we have a lot of 10th grade D,
Yeah.
uh, and probably a goaltender. Um,
Yep.
we'll return 2 goalies, but probably look for a younger third.
And then for most of your guys, so they're mostly doing fall hockey, but all of them are doing some kind of spring sport, right? You had a bunch of
They
guys played lacrosse and baseball, right?
So they have to,
Right.
and they have to because their fall training, it's called dynamic training
Okay.
instead of strength and conditioning. And the dynamic training is directly with our strength coach, whereas like the fitness and strength is more individual. You can get programs and things like that, but it's not like individual specific training. That's for dynamic. And the dynamic training, the requirement at Hotchkiss is you have to be on a varsity roster and you have to play a second sport. So because we're 600 kids, we can't have 150 kids sign up for strength and conditioning in the fall,
Right.
right? And there just wouldn't be any space. We want to make sure that our dedicated athletes are getting the time that they need to really develop and get better. We've had a couple kids because there are some requirements like those ninth graders technically like can't do, you have to be a 10, 11th or 12th grader. So
Yep.
we've got them a program or we've kind of done some workaround stuff, but for the most part, they all do dynamic, which requires a second sport. So all of our guys play something in the spring. It's golf, varsity or JV, lacrosse, both levels. We've got a tennis player, baseball. So they have to do something in the spring.
Yeah. Which is great. Like I think it's, I've gotten that question sometimes from parents, and I think some of it is not understanding necessarily the prep school schedule, right? And like that that spring season is still relatively short, right? Like you're coming back,
Spring's the best time to be on campus.
right? And also a good time to be doing something else. And
Yeah, it's a long 7 months, and I tell families like, especially if they don't have a secondary spring sport, like it's a good way to just try something new or to get out on our golf course on campus and play JV golf and just kind of take a little bit of a mental break.
I will always like when I'm talking to families, I'll say, you know, for a lot of my families, when I'm starting the process, like I think much like you and I, our families were like a lot of people well, I know prep school because I play hockey and there's kids who I played hockey with have gone to prep school or like, and I'm always like, well, can you name some schools or do you know anything about it? And very often they might be able to name a handful of schools. And oftentimes, like Hotchkiss is one of them, right? Like I think the reputation of the school precedes it. But when I'm like telling them about the school itself and like, hey, I think it's great size, right? A little bit kind of on for me what I would call the sort of I guess the bottom end of the larger school side, right in that 600
Upper mid.
range, and a really diverse student body, and like kind of a nice location in the boarding school world, right? Like your proximity is great. But then when I always hit them with like, like there's a golf course that runs through the campus. Like you can literally walk outside and play golf. It's a pretty nice value added, a nice little perk for both students and faculty.
Yeah, I've had families say, "Oh, it's nice to have a par three," and I'm like, "No, it's a full 9 hole course. I mean,
Right.
it's public. I think it was listed in a golf magazine, like top 100 public courses in Connecticut.
Yeah.
Golfer
And as a
Digest.
Taft alum, and I know like Taft and Hotchkiss big rivals, like it's a longer walk to the golf course at Taft than it is
Yes, it is.
at Hotchkiss, where it's
Yes.
literally right outside your window. You can get on the golf course where we had to hike it, a couple of 100 yards. So like,
Yeah.
give
Bummer.
give that one edge to the Bearcats, even as a Rhino here. Um, Great, man. Did we miss anything? I think we covered it. Is there anything else like important that you feel like you want some families to know?
I would just, tell families, I would just want them to know that like they should reach out. There's
Yeah,
no harm in reaching out. Like you said, trying to figure out nowadays, like it's really hard for me at Hotchkiss specifically to go to an event with 300 players plus and watch and try to, I think it's changed. Like I think when I first started and when I was at Berkshire, like it was pound the pavement. It was
For sure.
get them. Like I think it's really changed, and so I want to know who's interested in us too, and then take time to go out and see and evaluate and figure it out because there's just so many players out there. Trying to figure out, who's even interested is number one, and then are they academically capable, number two,
Right.
and if I go to an event two of those, or definitely at least one of those, is
Right.
off 75+% of kids. So definitely reach out to coaches and get involved in the process. What it's certainly you're better off having a coach know about you in the process, even if you're not a top guy, than him not knowing at all, which could actually hurt in the long run.
Yeah. The biggest thing I like, things I am always like, I feel like I repeat myself when I say these things, right? Of trying to educate families about like, hey, it's not like college hockey and like maybe younger is better. But the other thing I always tell families, one of the biggest misconceptions that I'm trying to fight about this process to families is this idea of I feel like too many families feel like going through the admissions process is making a decision to go to boarding school, which it is not at all, right? And so I'm always telling families like, look, the going through the process, going to visit a school, great. Like that's not committing you to go. Applying to a school is not a decision to go. Getting admitted to a school does not mean you're going. All you're doing is creating options for yourself. And for me, I think it's a great point to raise because like I feel like I've talked to the last couple of schools I've talked to, right, is with, between you, Hill, and Exeter, like sometimes within that 10 schools group, there is that feeling sometimes for families of like, well, I'm not really sure whether or not, like, can he get, how are we going to know if he's admissible? Like, well, there is only one way to know. Like, there's only one way to know, right? Like, and, I feel like part of, I hope anyways, the advantage of working with me for those families is like, there's a chance with our communication that we may know or be able to get a better sense of whether or not that's going to work earlier in the process. But the reality is it's going to be challenging unless you decide to go through it.
Yeah, totally. I mean, I think I get that a lot, especially in hockey now when all the teams are getting picked kind of later. I get from a lot of families, oh, well, we're not going to make any decisions until April, and it's like that's too late for us.
Right.
For some of the more selective schools, like it's not going to be an option. So, yeah, you'd rather go through the process and have the ability to say no than not go through the process and want to say yes, for sure.
Yeah. No, I always tell families that they're like, well, we're not sure if now is the right time or whatever. And I'm always like, look, but if the great school where you knew he could be successful and he gets admitted and there's a great hockey opportunity for him, they're like, would you go? The answer to that question is always yes. And I'm like, well, there's only one way to know whether does that actually exist? There is only one way to know that that's out there. And it's going to be to have to go through the process. And yeah, no. And I think I will always say like, um, I've always appreciated in working with you in what is, it's a challenging admission cycle you guys have at a selective school. Like, um, as I said in the beginning, like I think you guys are really thoughtful in how you're making those decisions and not just as a hockey coach, but I think I've also always appreciated like, at least with my families that I have going through the process with you guys, like, you have always been really clear and the clarity around like, hey, this is where we are and this is why we feel like we can make this decision or not is appreciated because like I've sat on your end like it's challenging there for you guys. So
Yeah, no, we appreciate working with you too. It's very helpful. So
hey, great man. Well, I appreciate you taking the time tonight and stealing you away from your family and we'll talk again soon.
totally, I appreciate you having me on. So
All right,
more
thanks,
to see
brother.
you. See ya.